Hello everyone, this is Jason for Primetime Aquatics, and in this video I am super excited to bring you stocking options for a 75-gallon aquarium. I've tried to give you lots of different options, some cichlids, some non-cichlids. We're going to take a look at some scavenger fish, different types of plecos and catfish. There should be something for everyone in this video. And oh, by the way, if you're still not finding what you're looking for, check out the stocking options videos we've done for other size tanks. The tanks are a little bit smaller, but they would still be wonderful fish for a 75-gallon. I hope you enjoy the video. Really appreciate you watching. So here we go. I want to show you a lot of cool fish that can go in a 75-gallon and fish that you might not always see at a pet store. I want to give you some different options. You can go to a pet store and find angelfish and all kinds of stuff and mollies, and those things are relatively easy to find. I want to show you some things that are a little bit unusual, like these featherfins. Now, some of these fish, a lot of these fish are not mine. They were done when I went to lots of different fish room and fish store tours. Definitely check those out if you want to see more. Also, I will have species profiles in the description below if you want more information on some of these fish and how to keep them in case you're looking for a little bit more information. Now, I've done the best I could at labeling all the fish that I possibly could, but again, featherfins are super cool. They're Lake Tanganyikan fish. They get a little bit larger than maybe something like your common Cyprichromis, but in a 75-gallon, a 4-foot tank, we're starting to get into that size where they can make some sense. And oh my gosh, if you look at these fish, they are absolutely magnificent. Now, they are going to be harder to find, and in some cases they're going to be significantly more expensive than a lot of your common fish that you would find for a 75-gallon. But if you want to come home and look at a tank that absolutely blows you away, this is a great place to start with these types of fish. Now, the featherfins, because they're Lake Tanganyikan African cichlids, they're going to need a little bit harder water, a little bit higher pH. But what I find so fascinating about these featherfins is the fact that they're really not superly over aggressive, and that can really make your tank a lot nicer to look at. We're going to look at some fish that get a little bit more aggressive, but we're also going to take a look at cichlids, non-cichlids that aren't going to cause you a bunch of stress when you come home and want to take a look. The other cool thing is if you can breed these fish, they are worth quite a bit of money. So definitely worth taking a look at the featherfins if you are looking for something different for your 75-gallon fish tank. Now, a 75-gallon is also where I might start thinking about a peacock tank for African cichlids, whether you want to do a single species and just have a breeding project going, or possibly an all-male 75-gallon peacock tank. Both of those things are potential options, but with a 75-gallon, I would suggest if you're going to do a peacock all-male tank, try to make sure the males look very different from one another. That's going to cut down on a lot of the issues, and try to find male peacocks that are going to be a little bit less aggressive and stay a little bit on the smaller side, and you're probably going to be a lot better off. Now, this happens to be one of our 75-gallon tanks. You can see it's kind of a mix. We've even got a female Midas cichlid in there, but we have a number of different peacocks, and they get along for the most part just fine. It is a mixed tank. We have lots of female dragon bloods in here and red empress, and we have lots of fish that are holding pretty much all the time. The OBs that you're looking at actually are a mix of dragon bloods and red empress, and that's what we get sometimes from these fish. So it can be a really fun tank, and for the most part there's not a lot of aggression going on in this tank, which is pretty interesting. But if you want something with a lot of color, check out African cichlid peacocks. They can be a lot of fun. There's so much variation, so many different colors. It would be really hard to give you the exact personalities and what they're going to be like when they're in the tank, because it really depends upon how you set up the tank. But generally speaking, again, you're going to be better off if you've got a tank with a little bit harder water, a little bit higher pH, and ideally, if you're going to do an all-male peacock tank or even a community tank where you've got males and females mixed, you might want to have a little bit more experience with fish in general, and certainly with cichlids before you try it out. In a 75-gallon, the larger you go, the easier it's going to be to manage this. So if you had a 125, this would be a much better option. But it can be done, and it can be very rewarding when you get it right. This happens to be some of our star sapphires. Now in this video, they're actually in a 40-gallon breeder, and they grew up together. We have 3 males and 2 females, and it worked out just fine. These get a little bit larger, and ideally they need to be moved into a 75-gallon, but very pretty fish. And I happen to think one of the most rewarding tanks that you can have if you get it right, 75 gallon especially, that's what we're looking at here, is a mixed mbuna tank. We've got males in here, we've got females in here, and I really enjoy looking at this tank. There's so much color, so much variation, so much action, and when it's time to eat, they all go crazy and they pretend like they've never eaten a day in their lives. So an mbuna tank might be a really fun option. And in fact, I actually think the mbuna cichlids are a little bit easier to manage than the peacock. So if you wanted to try a 75 gallon cichlid tank, this might be an easier way to go, especially if you stay with something like yellow labs and rusty cichlids and maybe some Pseudotropheus silosa. Here we're looking at rusty cichlids, but that might actually be an even better option. Maybe add some red zebras, so you're still going to get a lot of color, but you're not going to get the super aggressive mbuna. I highly recommend do your homework if you want to do an mbuna tank, because some of them can be really aggressive, others not quite as much. So maybe you don't like African cichlids, or your water's not conducive for their growth. Here's a geophagus altifrons. These are still cichlids, but they are from, I'm going to show you a bunch from South and Central America. I love geophagus. They are one of my all-time favorite species of fish and genera, and it's just such a cool fish. They, for the most part, are not superly overly aggressive. I've mentioned them before. By the way, we've done species profiles on some of the geophagus. I'll put those in the description below. And we've also done a lot of stocking options, everywhere from a 2.5 gallon up to a 55 gallon fish tank. So if you want a lot more options on fish that you could keep in a 75, check out those, because they're going to give you a ton of options regarding what you can put in a 75, and often because those fish are smaller, you can usually add a lot more. So when it comes to the geophagus, up to this point, I have only recommended pretty much geophagus tapajos, which we're going to see in a few moments, up to about a 55 gallon tank, because for the most part, geophagus can get a little bit larger. The tapajos stay smaller. A lot of the fish that I'm showing you now, they're going to get a little bit larger, and so we probably want at least a 75 gallon to make it comfortable and give them enough space. These are some of my favorite geophagus. These are geophagus drupari. Really super pretty fish. Now with some of the geophagus, you're going to have a little bit of patience. Sometimes it takes a little while for them to color up. It takes a little while for them to grow. A lot of them grow on the slower side, but your patience will absolutely be rewarded as they grow, as they show their colors, and especially as those fins really start to grow and you start to see those trailers. Here's the geophagus tapos. These guys are actually in a 55 gallon working out just fine. Now, one of the things you may want to think about, I'm giving you a lot of options here. That doesn't mean that all of these fish can go together in a single 75 gallon tank, especially when we're talking about mixing African cichlids and these South American cichlids. That may not work, but even different types of geophagus, I personally have found the more similar cichlids look to one another, the more potential for issues. So for instance, even I've tried to mix geophagus with Bolivian rams and found out, believe it or not, the Bolivian rams would chase the geophagus all around a 75 gallon tank. So when it comes to cichlids, you may want to consider definitely their personality, their aggression level, and for the most part, the geophagus are not relatively aggressive, and certainly I have not found them to be aggressive towards fish that don't look anything like them. But if you were to try to keep multiple geophagus together in a 75 gallon, either different species or the same species, you always run the risk of having a little bit of aggression. So it's just something to keep in mind. Maybe you look at a geophagus, and later on we'll talk about other fish that you might be able to mix together. But the geophagus, just generally speaking, are absolutely phenomenal fish. Here we're looking at Geophagus brasiliensis. Now these fish are considerably more aggressive than some of the other geophagus out there, but look at how pretty they are. And again, this might be something where you only want to keep one of them, right? We've got a big group of them right here in a 125 gallon tank, but as they get older, they'd get more aggressive. So maybe you just keep a single geophagus and something else to kind of round out that 75 gallon tank. But they're really great fish. And finally, I just wanted to show you our Geophagus pellegrini. We don't have these fish anymore. We lost them when they had a bacterial infection, but they were in a 125. Look how pretty these fish are. Not super aggressive. They're a little bit shy. They're not very common, but they are really, really cool fish, and they're becoming a little bit easier to find. Definitely worth trying if you can find them. One of the other fish that I think you can consider when we're looking at a 75-gallon tank is potentially Severums. There are different types of Severums, many different types of colors. We've done species profiles on these fish before. They are magnificent. They do get on the larger side, and I really do think a 75-gallon, you're really pushing the limits of the bare minimum tank size that I would use for a Severum. And this is something where you could potentially try to mix Severums with geophagus. So again, as you're building your community and thinking about the different types of fish you want to keep, I have personally had good luck with some types of Severums and some types of geophagus. I will say that in my experience, the green Severums have been more aggressive than, let's say, the red shoulder that you're looking at now, or the gold Severums. And when I asked that question to my viewers, a lot of people seem to say the same thing, that the green Severums were probably the most aggressive out of the different types. Why that is, I don't know. That's just personal experience and from what I've heard from other people. But the Severums are beautiful fish. Again, they do get fairly large. They're going to eat plants like it's nobody's business, but they are magnificent fish. They tend not to be overly active, and they can be a good fit in a relatively non-aggressive 75-gallon either community tank, or if you're dealing with other non-aggressive or not very aggressive South and Central Americans, they can fit in really well. A lot of cool color. Now, there are some other types of cichlids you could consider. This happens to be a true parrot cichlid. This is from my buddy Tim's fish room. This was a really great fish. Looks way better in person than I could get it to look on camera, but it's something you can consider. Now, some of these cichlids I'm going to show you now might be, maybe you just have a pair. Here's some, Jack Dempsey, where maybe you've got a pair, or maybe you've just got one and you're trying to mix them in with some of these other cichlids. But some of these are a little bit more aggressive, so you might want to consider just having a pair in a 75, or really cutting back on the stocking level. Most of these cichlids that I'm going to show you in coming up here, the aggression levels kicked up a little bit, so it really depends on your stocking preferences and what you want to see. But for some people, they don't mind keeping just 1 or 2 fish in a 75-gallon tank if those fish warrant it, if they look amazing. A lot of these larger cichlids start to act more like water dogs and pets than just part of a community with larger fish, so that's something to keep in mind too. That can be a preference for a lot of people. Here we see this is a really cool Cuban cichlid, and I like these a lot. Again, this is from my buddy Tim's fish room that we're looking at now, but these are great fish. Maybe you consider throwing a pair of these in a 75-gallon and see if they can breed, but they are definitely a fish that can stand on their own. Something I really enjoyed was having our Midas cichlids. This was Roger before he passed on, and they had a whole bunch of fry in this tank, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fry. But these were the only fish in this tank. We had the male and the female. They had a 75-gallon to themselves, and they were so personable. I didn't mind having such a large tank for just a couple of fish, just because they got along so well. They recognize you when you walk up to the glass. They would get super excited. So again, it's just something you can consider as you're looking at stocking options for your 75-gallon. Instead of doing a community tank, maybe you just want 1 or 2 fish and just really have that awesome connection with them. Now, you may be thinking, that's great, but I really would like something besides some cichlid suggestions. Well, don't worry, we've got you covered. Gouramis. Now, I know they're common, and one of the things that I mentioned when I did the species profile on Gouramis, this happens to be a 150-gallon tank, is the blues, the opalines, the gold Gouramis, your full-size Gouramis. They can be somewhat aggressive, and keeping them in smaller tanks like a 20 or a 29 or even a 40-gallon breeder, sometimes that doesn't always work out well. I know some people have had some success keeping these full-size Gouramis in smaller tanks, but in my experience, they do get somewhat aggressive, and they're not afraid to chase around some cichlids that are much larger than themselves. So once you get to that 75-gallon, I think, if we're talking about some of these other fish like Severums and geophagus, you could potentially put a Gourami in there, get a little bit of different color, different feel. I would not put multiple Gouramis in a 75-gallon tank. At least from my experience, they really are rough on one another, but it's just something you could add as part of the overall stocking option. So what about schooling fish? How about some rainbows? Or maybe even some rose-lined sharks, otherwise known as Denison barbs. These could be a potentially nice option in a 75-gallon tank, because you've got the space, you've got the volume to allow them to swim around. Rose-lined sharks get pretty big. They're going to want to be in a school. Usually about 4 to 6 would be a good place to start. And that's going to be a fairly high concentration of fish. So if you're doing something like that, or if you've got some rainbow fish in the tank, maybe you're just looking at a Severum and or a geophagus to combine with some of these schooling fish. That might be a really cool mix of fish. Now, the other thing you could think about is, okay, well, what about my cleanup crew? What about my scavengers? Here we've got the red-tailed shark. It's in a 75 gallon. It's in there with a green Severum. It's in there right now. You can see it with a heckle eye. There's also a leaf tinapoma, which would be a really cool option. This is an aggressive fish. There is no doubt about it. You cannot put these fish in a typical community tank. I get comments time and time again because we've done a species profile on this fish. Hey, can I put it in a 29 gallon or a 40 gallon or a 55? Or wow, you know what, my red-tailed shark's not as aggressive as you said it was going to be. And then we hear, oh, well, it's only 2 or 3 inches. This is a big fish that you're looking at, somewhere in that 6 to 7 inch mark. Here's the leaf tinapoma that I think would be another really good option for a 75 gallon. Unusual fish, very calm, but those red-tailed sharks, be careful with them. They need a semi-aggressive tank at least. Other things, you could look at some really cool, maybe different loaches. This is another one that would fit into kind of that semi-aggressive tank, that Bermorii loach. I've done a species profile on these before. I think it's probably my favorite loach out there. You could see here, it is, even the red-tailed shark doesn't bother it. In fact, I had to remove some clown loaches from this tank when I first put him in there because these are relatively aggressive fish. Really good with Severums and geophagus and some of the other fish that I've mentioned so far, even as you can see the red-tailed shark. But if you can find them, definitely worth taking a look at because they are just super cool fish. So I wanted to give you a couple of options because they're a little bit different than your typical, okay, here's some cory cats or some bristlenose plecos. You know, you've got a little bit of a larger tank, and cory cats are super awesome, and you could certainly do 10 or 12 of them in a tank. That would be really awesome to see. But if you wanted a little bit of a larger catfish, something different, you could certainly begin to look at these slightly, somewhat moderately more aggressive types of scavengers. An option for a cool catfish that's not super aggressive are the Cynodontis. They can be anywhere from a few inches, like the dwarf petricolas, up to 6-7 inches or more. So the Cynodontis are really cool. They're active. There's different types. We could start looking at larger plecos, maybe some plecos that are more unusual because now you've got this larger 75 gallon tank. Now some of these plecos do get expensive. In fact, this is when we did a fish room tour of freshwater exotics. Highly recommend, check it out if you're into plecos. But they had a lot of really cool ones that can grow 6 to 8 inches to maybe even a foot. And if we can stay in that 6 to 10 inch range, you could get some really cool looking plecos for your 75 gallon tank that go beyond your typical bristlenose plecos, which we have recommended before in smaller tanks. But now we're in a larger tank, so you've got more options. They're going to be super expensive. Some of the downsides are, yeah, you might not always be able to find them. They might go out and hide a little bit, but they're pretty awesome. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a different perspective. And if you did, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.